Now, given the history of the Catholic Church, which I won't go into too deeply, King Henry VIII in 1536 expatriated the whole Catholic faith completely from all of England. Then had the Church of England established and proclaiming the Church of England as the one and only lawful Church of England. Now this is quite significant, and for good reason. Then in the early 1600s, King James I had commissioned a new Bible, the Authorised King James Bible, which was finished and published in 1611. Now this Bible was written with Christian values in mind instead of Catholic. Now this was the first real breakaway from the Catholic Church, because a whole new foundation could be laid without any Catholic influence. The Anglican Christian faith, and what this faith was to become. But the Catholic Church made a comeback in King Charles I in 1625, under the St. Edward's crown of all things. King Charles I married a Roman Catholic and allowed the Catholic Church to infiltrate all or most official offices and the Church of England itself, which of course brought a now United Kingdom of Great Britain, Scotland and Ireland under the influence of the Vatican. Now this saw the subjects of the Imperial Kingdom, of the United Kingdom facing high taxes that were not authorised by the Parliament, and an apparent tyrannical system of monarchy, which clearly angered the people, and which ultimately led to Oliver Cromwell heading the English Civil War in 1942. So King Charles I was defeated and ultimately tried and executed in 1649. Now I'll just read this from his sentence. So his sentence reads, that the High Court, being satisfied that he, Charles Stuart, was guilty of the crimes of which he had been accused, did judge him a tyrant, traitor, murderer, and public enemy to the good people of the nation, to be put to death by the severing of his head from his body. So he was a traitor, tyrant, murderer, and a public enemy. And the reason for that is because he was under the St. Edward's crown. But moving on. So this in itself was a turning point for England. Oliver Cromwell, I believe, saw to the theft twice and ultimately the destruction of the St. Edward's crown. The execution of King Charles I was warranted, in my opinion, but Cromwell and all those that signed his death warrant were tried and executed themselves for regicide in 1658. Now I believe this was later overturned, and they were I can't even say that word, later given a reprieve, so to speak, because they did the right thing. They got rid of the Catholic and the Catholic crown. And at the end of the day, the Catholic crown was the problem. So while the United Kingdom was still sorting itself out, when James II became King of England and Ireland, and he was also James VII as the King of Scotland, and that started in 1685. And this was only 37 years after the execution of James I. And of course the St. Edward's crown again made a comeback. James II was also a Roman Catholic, and he was a big part in the attempted return to Catholic influence within the United Kingdom, which led to the Glorious Revolution of 1688 and the removal of King James as king. So with all that in mind, we can clearly see why the Catholic St. Edward's crown and all the Catholic influence has been outlawed, by virtue that it is linked to the Vatican. As anyone having ties to the Vatican, and especially a Catholic head of state, is simply not allowed. We can also see very clearly why the St. Edward's crown was stolen twice and ultimately destroyed. Now, this was only a minor setback for the Vatican's plans. And we can clearly see the St. Edward's crown has again made a return in 1936, after more than 200 years kept out of the people's view and minds. So, fast forward to 1936. Now, at this time, the people of the Commonwealth countries, including the Kingdom of Australia, were all subject of their respective imperial crowns. And King George VI, or the Australian government at the time in 1948, under the St. Edward's crown, offered the Naturalisation and Citizenship Act 1948 to the people. Now, the people were never told what it meant to become a citizen, and the people certainly didn't know their history. If they did, they wouldn't have taken citizenship. Now, this was actually a big turning point for the Kingdom of Australia, the United Kingdom of Australia, thanks to the ignorance of the people at the time. And so what the people were not told, that by applying for the birth certificate for their children, what they were actually doing was begging the government to take their children as wards of the state. So anybody that took a birth certificate became a ward of the state. Now, on paper at the time, it looked as though the people kept their subject of the Crown status. The Naturalisation and Citizenship Act 1948 did state that the people had two statuses, a subject and a citizen. But in actual fact, you can't be both. But the subject status on paper would later be removed in 1973, leaving the people only as citizens. But I haven't got to that part yet. And it gets much worse. Not only does the birth certificate make you a ward of the state, it also makes you the state's property as a citizen. That is what a citizen is. A citizen belongs to the government. So citizenship is not only a ward of the state, it's also a change of allegiance and a change of status in law. And a change of allegiance is a very bad thing for a number of reasons. And this is also where it gets quite complicated and very technical. The people ceased being the people, as mentioned in the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act 1900 UK preamble, under the blessing of Almighty God. So technically the people were no longer standing in the Bible as the people, nor can the people use the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act 1900 UK and no longer have standing at law to use either of them for their protection. Even if the Commonwealth of Australia wasn't occupied militarily, you still couldn't use them. But they took care of that simply by making you a citizen. And this is also due to a number of other reasons. Now, due to the change of allegiance to another crown, a Catholic crown, the people were no longer loyal to their own crown and Kingdom of Australia, dishonouring and disrespecting our God. Now, citizenship exists under Roman law. It doesn't exist under the imperial law or under the imperial crown. You won't find the word citizen in the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act. And that's because it's tied to Rome. So through your allegiance to that St. Edward's crown, you are tied to Rome under that St. Edward's crown. Therefore, you're under Roman law. I'll come back to a little bit of that later. And also, a change of allegiance under the rules of war gives right for the occupying military to place the burdens of war directly on the belligerent or disloyal. The Liber Code will also tell you that they can do whatever they like to the belligerent or disloyal and for any reason. and they wouldn't even be breaking any rules or laws because you belong to them as a citizen. So anyway, I'll move on to 1953. Now, Queen Elizabeth II became Queen of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. You'll see that in her Royal Styles and Titles Act 1953. Not under the crown of, not under the imperial crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. Now, Queen Elizabeth II was coronated once publicly on a fake coronation stone, and it was a complete farce. It was on TV and everything. You can see it on YouTube, but it was a complete crock of shit. And again, 3 days later, she was coronated properly, but the second time it wasn't public, and nor was it the imperial crown or realm. It was under the St. Edward's crown and under the Pope. So she took the same foreign crown, the same foreign line of authority from the same foreign god as her father, King George VI. And this is clearly displayed on her heraldry. You can't deny this shit. And clearly not the imperial Tudor crown and line of authority as displayed by Queen Victoria and King George V. But even if Queen Elizabeth II did take the imperial crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, she would still not be our queen unless she took the imperial crown of the United Kingdom of Australia and was coronated in Melbourne on our coronation stone of the United Kingdom of Australia. And this never happened. Never. So she's not our queen. By any stretch of the imagination. She's a foreign queen under a foreign crown with a foreign line of authority, and there's no two ways about that. So don't listen to anybody that tells you any different. They're either misleading you deliberately, or they don't know what the hell they're talking about. But anyway, let's fast forward to 1973. And this is where a lot of big changes took place, a lot of interesting changes, and it was right under the nose of the Australian people. So the Commonwealth of Australia Parliament, under the Imperial Crown and Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act 1900 UK, was closed down due to having no people to serve. Not that they served the people anyway, but the people became citizens under a foreign crown, so there was no need for a Commonwealth of Australia government anymore. And a corporation named Australia, under their own constitution, the Australian Constitution, began administrating the Commonwealth of Australia, again, due to being no people, no head of state, and of course no government. The Citizenship Act 1983 makes no mention of subjects at all, so that status didn't exist, or doesn't exist under Australian law, which is under the St. Edward's Crown. So the former people, subjects of the imperial crown, were all at this stage no longer subjects of any crown, but firmly under the St. Edward's Crown as citizens of Rome. Australian citizens, but to Rome. There's no two ways about that. But you know, there are a lot of other changes. Legislation that was rewritten and put under their Australian Constitution, and a whole lot of other things that I just won't get into because there's just too many of them. Also, 1973, Gough Whitlam signed Australia, the corporation, over to the Foreign Unidroit Treaty of Rome, handing the equitable title of all of the mineral and energy wealth of Australia to a foreign power, seated in Rome, the Vatican. In effect, this created a foreign contractual system of government in our country as opposed to common law under our Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act. So let's not kid ourselves here. The Australian government is a foreign de facto administration under a foreign crown. Don't let anyone tell you different. For all the people that deny this fact, you're either gullible, you're being misled, or you're misleading deliberately. There's just way too much evidence to be denied. Even if you deny some evidence, there's still a whole lot of other evidence that points all this out.